If you're a kid in the 80s or the 90s, this is probably going to sound familiar, but if not, this might sound a little bit unhinged.
Are these your drugs?
Look, Dad, it's not.
Where did you get it?
Dad,
Answer me. Who taught you how to do this stuff?
You, all right? I learned it by watching you.
Parents who use drugs have children who use drugs.
There was a lot of mixed messaging back then. So something that was kind of a normal occurrence is that when a kid was on medication, they would give that medication to the school nurse, and then at some point in the day, the nurse would call the kid down to the nurse's office and then give the kid that medication. It was usually like antibiotics or something like that. It was something super short-lived. A lot of kids were getting tonsillectomies and stuff. Other kids, it was something that was like an everyday occurrence. It was usually one of the kids who talked too much, who couldn't sit still, or they'd rather draw than pay attention. And you were like, oh, they're on Ritalin, because it was such a normalized thing. It was as normal as needing glasses or an inhaler. And I happened to live in Florida at the time. I had 4 years that I spent living in Florida in the 90s. And in my school in particular, they were heavily pushing children onto Ritalin. And I remember my parents particularly being approached about my sister being put onto Ritalin. They were like, abso-freaking-lutely not. Because they used to say all the time that these kids are like zombies.
American kids over-medicated. Dr. Nancy Snyderman will discuss the debate over Ritalin use and its long-term effects.
We had these twins that lived across the street. My parents called them the Poltergeist twins. I think that was more along the lines of them looking like Heather O'Rourke from Poltergeist as opposed to the Ritalin, but I think it was probably some combination of the two, because I'm sure the Ritalin didn't help. Looking back in hindsight, it was really just kids being kids, but back then, kids were not just energetic or sensitive or creative. They were something that required medical correction. I didn't really clock the whole medicating thing as being something as serious as it was until I hit my teens. And myself, like a lot of kids, it wasn't until really finding a peer group that really resonated and got you that you kind of came into your own. And with me, it was countercultures. It was things like alternative music. So it started with grunge, it went into industrial, and then of course goth. But all of my friends were in so many different groups, that were considered alternative. You had grunge kids, your metalheads, your skaters, and you had groups from basically every counterculture that you can think of in a school. And it was finding those countercultures that we really started to realize that we weren't broken, like everyone was doing their dead level best to try to make us believe. We're just different. When we all kind of individually started finding ourselves in countercultures and feeling where we belonged, it was, realizing that we would rather dye our hair green and make art than wear pink, play football, and chant in pep rallies. But it was around those times that in schools, we started getting flagged as problems.
Dad, didn't you ever have guys at your school that didn't fit in?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah? Well, I'm one of those guys.
Thought things were going okay for you.
Yeah, well, I like art. I work in a gas station. My best friend is a tomboy. These things don't fly too well in the American high school.
So by this point, being established as like one of the alternative kids and all of my friends being alternative, they all had regular psychiatrists. I didn't at the time, but we'd all been through the guidance counselors. A lot. A lot of us had been straight up gaslit into believing that there was something really mentally wrong with us. It was as if choosing individuality was like this terrible thing, and thinking for yourself was seen as selfish or defiant. So I should really point out that my parents were counterculture as well. Like my mom was a punk from the 70s and the 80s, and my father played in bands. He's a drummer, he was a rocker. So he was somebody who was also kind of discriminated against. He had the long hair, he had the tattoos. So in the 70s and in the 80s, that wasn't exactly looked kindly upon. So I didn't get that level of flack from my parents, but I did get it from other sources. I got it from society as a whole. I got it every time I left the house. Other adults. It's astounding how other adults feel that they can talk to other people's children simply because they don't like the way that they look. But I got it from teachers, authority figures, and also my friends, seeing what my friends had gone through. Their parents were very conservative, or they were religious, and they did not like the way that they looked or the way that they dressed or the music they listened to. So, a lot of the way society treated it was that, well, your parents have a right to be embarrassed, and then they would see them in public and look at the parents with pity.
I just can't understand how a group of young people can even walk around looking that way. Yeah. My goodness, if you don't go to work like everybody else, get up in the morning, and just be a good citizen and help other people and be a good Christian, You're accomplishing absolutely nothing. When your appearance is like their appearance, I'm like, what else can you think? I have 4 children of my own. I would not allow any of my kids to walk out the door looking that way.
What if they insisted on it?
I couldn't insist. I'm the mother.
How would you?
But what if they rebelled?
No. My husband works pretty darn hard to support our 4 children. And we expect something back from them, just a little respect. I don't expect my kids to pay room or board or
You
to
wouldn't
give
throw
them...
them out of the house, though.
Yes, if they joined a group like that, yes.
You would stop loving them and throw them out of the house.
No, I wouldn't stop loving them.
But you would throw
But
them out
there
of the
is
house.
no way anyone like that could live under the roof of my house. Why?
Why?
No, just
Would
because
it-
I gave these
why?
kids
Would it-
life and brought them into this world, I don't deserve that.
So, of course, the culture of the time would be to treat or medicate it out of you, and I was all too casually introduced to the term manic depression by the age of 14, and this was sort of a catch-all term that they liked to apply to basically everyone so that they can have a reason to prescribe you medication. And the amount of my friends that were diagnosed with manic depression and medicated, it was disturbing, to say the least. I want to say 75% of my friends, at least that I knew about, were already on medication. They were on heavy things like lithium, like Prozac. And it wasn't because they needed them. I would say probably 2 friends off the top of my head probably did need them. But the majority of them, no. When you medicate somebody who doesn't need it, the reaction is not pretty. I mean, you think our appearances were disturbing. That was nothing compared to seeing our friends when the meds kicked in. A lot of the instability that people like to use to point out as proof that a lot of us were just mentally defective it wasn't us. I mean, granted, a lot of it was saying the quiet parts out loud or letting the impulses win, but it was mostly because we didn't hold anything in. You know, alternative kids, we weren't trying to impress anybody. Our peer group wasn't the societal norms, which is when you're trying to impress them, to impress would be to suppress. And we were not about that. You know, if you had it in there, you let it out. You had something to say, you said it. And a lot of that was seen as outwardly abnormal. So that was part of it. But some of it was reputation, and then some of it was what the medication was doing. These kids were not sat in therapist office because there was something inherently wrong with them. They were sent to these therapists because they wanted them to be like all of the other kids. So going back between elementary school and high school, you think that seeing your peers on heavy psych meds was the first time. Nope. It's just the first time you noticed. So the time the whole medicating and psychological intervention was really hitting its peak, parents were also being saturated with fear messaging. There were tons of PSAs and after-school specials warning parents that their kids were being corrupted. There were church sermons about satanic influence. These sensationalist news stories about music, movies, games, aesthetic that were just destroying young minds. There were literal PSAs teaching parents how to identify whether or not their kid is a Satanist, and if you look through the checklists, it's just a normal teenager who happens to listen to rock music.
Warning signs of satanic behavior may be apparent, such as a sudden, bitterly antagonistic attitude towards family and religion, a drastic decline in academic performance, a reclusive behavior pattern, and listening exclusively to heavy metal rock music, almost to the point of addiction. When one or more of these warning signs are evident, you should look further for ritual items such as a pentagram or other satanic symbols, black or red robes, a decorative dagger or knife, a chalice or goblet, black candles, a personal diary with a black cover, which is called a Book of Shadows, and copies of publications such as the Satanic Bible and the Satanic Rituals, and possibly a small makeshift altar. If you discover items such as these, experts advise you contact your local law enforcement agency at once.
So many things were framed as something external coming to hijack your child's brain. Books, movies, music, clothing, games, a hat is coming to steal your child's soul. One example is an after-school special, and it was Tom Hanks' first starring role. It was called Mazes and Monsters, but it was very clearly aimed at Dungeons and Dragons, which was very popular at the time. It came out in 1982, and the message was very clear. Your kid plays this game. They lose their grip on reality, you lose your kid forever. It begins with a healthy, young, and wholesome Tom Hanks in school with his friends and casually starting to play a game, and then all of a sudden it ends with him attempting to jump off a building using spells and then living out the rest of his life in a mental institution because his brain is lost to the game forever.
Robbie! Pardue, what are you doing?
Going to join the Great Hall.
You can't, it's a trap.
I have spells. I'm going to fly.
You don't have enough points. I am the maze controller.
Maze control?
Yes, and I have absolute authority in this game.
Game?
Game.
Game.
No, he couldn't have had any underlying issues or anything. No need to investigate and look for things like schizophrenia, maybe stress triggering the onset. Satan clearly came out of the game and stole his brain because that is the only logical conclusion. But this was all very strategic because nuance does not sell fear. And this is how moral panics work. It takes an individual crisis and then turns it into justification for mass control. Another good PSA that came out in the later 80s that really illustrated the culture of the time was one called The Day My Kid Went Punk. It was not meant to be, I don't believe, as wholesome as it was, but the kid they chose to be the punk was also the boy from The Boy Who Could Fly. The whole premise, really, is the mother of this child is a psychiatrist, sort of renowned. She travels the country and she wants to help families face the punk crisis, depunkify their children, and here all of a sudden her child explores his identity as a punk. And now she has to grapple with that.
Why are you doing this?
It's cool, Dad. You know, it works for me.
Well, it doesn't work for me.
It doesn't have to, Mom.
Really? Oh, well, you don't happen to be in the world all by yourself, Terry. You do have a family to consider.
I thought you always said different was okay.
Oh, I knew you'd throw that one up to me someday.
Sweetheart, listen.
How can you be so calm about this?
Louise, I'm not being calm. I'm just trying to understand what's going on here. We've obviously failed him somehow.
Well, don't start that, okay? I'm the psychologist. Terry is the best adjusted of the three kids.
Not anymore.
Very funny.
Look, it's a phase. You said so yourself. He'll grow out of it.
Before the conference?
That's not very likely.
Well, we'll just have to send him home.
We can't do that. He's got a job. Remember what we taught him about being responsible?
But we can't be seen with him during the conference. We'll have to pretend we don't know him.
So that reaction, particularly back then, was very standard, and it was culture telling on itself. Parents were told, something has possessed your child, something has brainwashed them, something has stolen them from you. But what was actually happening was that kids were developing autonomy. They were developing identity. They were developing agency. Authority panicked because it was projecting its own demand for control outward. So it was blaming things like art, music, games, subculture for doing the exact thing that power itself was trying to do. Doth do protest too much. So going back to the meds, I kind of wanted to cut the boomer parents a little bit of slack because the generation that they grew up in, they weren't really given much in the way of choice. They had expectations followed by consequences should those expectations not be met. And when they grew up and became parents, they were medicated too. Valium, barbiturates, sedatives. Discomfort was not something that you explored. That was something that you fucking suppressed. So when their kids didn't sit still, blend in, behave predictably, medicating seemed all too familiar. And back then, you did not negotiate with discomfort, you tranquilized it. So when kids from varying alternative groups, they found counterculture spaces, they weren't looking for chaos. They were looking for others that were like them. They were looking for a place where they fit, where they belonged. These spaces, these communities, they had boundaries because boundaries mattered. History mattered. Safety mattered. This was not gatekeeping. This was not authoritarianism. This was safeguarding. And what happens when you don't? Well, fast forward, and all of those aesthetics that are associated with different countercultures are stripped of their meaning, and they're sold back to you as a costume. So these people come in, they wear the look, they slap on the label, but with none of the culture. They reject the music, they reject the ethics, they reject the history, but they also demand that the culture change itself to accommodate them. They call it inclusion, but that's neither inclusion nor is it participation. That's an overwrite. That is an actor wearing the costume and claiming the role. Who are you, Tom Hanks in Mazes and Monsters? And when you point this out, with history, with footage, with evidence, what happens? You get called a gatekeeper. An authoritarian, that's a new one. A bully. And it's not presented as an argument. Its whole purpose is a shutdown. Silencing tactic. It flips the roles to make the people who are defending cultures look like they're the aggressors, while the ones hollowing it out, they get to claim victimhood. And they wear that moral camouflage hard because they know that it works. And it works because more people are afraid of being socially punished than they are of being intellectually honest. And when people get angry with you over facts, they're not really angry at you. They're angry at the mirror. People who create moral panics have always been afraid of difference. They want clean lines, clear rules, and predictable behavior. Counterculture breaks that because it doesn't respect hierarchy and it never asks society for permission. But when suppression stops working, that is when control changes tactics. It moves inside. They adopt the look. They borrow the language. They demand access to spaces that they once tried to destroy. They try to rewrite the history and soften the meaning until it's no longer a threat to them, or rejects them, and to the people who've actually lived it, those of us who've called the culture our home, those who have built this thing because they had nowhere else to go, they get pushed out. They get silenced and rewritten as extremists in their own culture. These people haven't changed who they are. They just changed lanes. And in this lane, they traded psychotherapy and medication for black lipstick and hashtags.